So with the release of Chapter 4 of Two Blue Vortex, a lot of talk has been revolving around Boruto, as old theories have been confirmed, new theories have been created, and more importantly than anything, new questions have begun to be asked. See, it's now been confirmed to us that Boruto has a new signature jutsu outside of Rasengan Uzuhiko, and that's Flying Thunder God. It's also been confirmed to us that Boruto has a new teacher, Kashin Koji, and we've now, for the first time in Two Blue Vortex, seen Sasuke, and he currently exists within a divine tree. And therefore, while a lot of lingering questions have been answered, some very important new questions are beginning to be asked. Like, who taught Boruto flying Raijin? How did Boruto and Kashin Koji's paths cross? How did Sasuke end up in the divine tree? And maybe more importantly than anything, who are these new Shinju or divine trees? See, using the divine tree terminology here is kind of confusing. See, because if a claw grime bites you and you're not no Otsutsuki, you grow into a failed divine tree. And now that the official translation of Two Blue Vortex's 4th chapter is out, apparently they're also calling the entities that are created after a claw grime turns somebody into a failed divine tree, divine trees. So now not only is Sasuke in a failed divine tree, but also there's a split off entity that's also called the divine tree, which is wild because now, for the first time in the history of leaks, I preferred the name we had in the leaks. Calling the failed divine trees that people were caught up in divine trees, and the entities created by those failed divine trees Shinju, was perfect. But now everything is just a divine tree. So while if you waited for the official translation, first off, good job, but just know, I'm calling the walking divine trees Shinju, because that's what they technically directly translate to. But why are we talking about these walking divine trees or Shinju? Well, because inarguably the biggest question being raised from Chapter 4 of Two Blue Vortex is, who are these Shinju? Well, we've already confirmed that one is Bug and another is Sasuke. 2 out of the 4 Shinju, a whole half of them, we don't know their real identity. We don't know how they came about, we don't know who the claw grimes had to bite to make them, or if a claw grime had to bite anybody to make them. Yeah, that's how deep these waters go, which is why today we're going to be trying to answer exactly that question. Which is why today we're talking, who are the identities of Boruto's new Akatsuki? But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you want to hear me speculate about some of your favorite anime, guys, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. If you guys just want to hear me talk about anime, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Or if you just want to look like somebody who does talk about anime, guys, go ahead and meander into my anime merch store, otakusanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs known to man. So there's new big bad guys in Boruto. And while there's currently only 4 of them, there could definitely be more in the future. This new Akatsuki, these walking divine trees, or Shinju as we're gonna call them, are a weird mix of claw grimes and humans. But that kind of makes sense when we consider the fact that in order for these Shinju to be created in the first place, a claw grime has to bite a human and generate a failed divine tree that eventually splits off into some form of walking divine tree that has an ego or self-awareness. And that self-aware Shinju has all of the abilities and some of the personality of the person the claw grime bit to make that Shinju in the first place. And we're able to speculate this strictly based off the fact that Sasuke's Shinju has the ability to use Chidori. And ironically, the jutsus that the Shinju use might actually be our biggest key into understanding who these Shinju are. But before we dive into the identities of these Shinju, we should go over why I want to call these entities Shinju. Well, it mostly has to do with the fact that Shinju is an incredibly metal term in Japanese. See, Shinju in Japanese actually refers to a double consensual unaliving. God, it is hard to skate around terms for YouTube's community guidelines. But for the sake of making this happy and cheery and community guideline approved, the best example that I can give you to describe the word Shinju is Romeo and Juliet, as both Romeo and Juliet decided to take their own lives when they saw that the other had taken theirs. And therefore the word Shinju refers to any time 2 people decide to take their own lives together, whether they be classmates, lovers, family members. But it doesn't only have to be 2 people. In fact, Jonestown would be considered Shinju. As long as it's more than 2 people, then we're good. I mean, we're not you get it. And outside of the fact that it's incredibly metal that Japan has a word for this, I also think there might be a hint about their existence in the term Shinju. Because one, even if you just look at the word subjectively and take what we already know about the Shinju, applying the name Shinju to them makes a good amount of sense. See, because simply, in order for the Shinju to exist, they have to take the life of somebody else. In order for the Sasuke Shinju to exist, Sasuke has to remain in a divine tree. On top of this, one could absolutely argue that when a claw grime bites onto somebody, it takes both its life and the person who it's bit. Because even though the people in the failed divine trees are technically still alive, their life, at least for a brief amount of time, is put on halt. While the claw grime that bit them turns into a tree, so it basically ceases to exist. However, if we extrapolate possible information about the Shinju, it has the possibility of making the name make even more sense. See, if these walking divine trees consume Boruto, we know that it spells the end of the world, which means to us that these Shinju still have the ability to eat Otsutsuki and turn into a proper divine tree. This is evidenced by the fact that the Mohawk Shinju still says that it's their primal instinct to consume Boruto, and the fact that Kashin Koji said that if Boruto was eaten, it would have spelled the end of the world instantaneously. However, the reason that Boruto wasn't eaten in chapter 4 is because these Shinju were gaining self-awareness. And as they begin to gain self-awareness, they understand that if they eat an Otsutsuki, they'll die. Well, maybe die isn't the right word, but they'll lose their self-awareness, which I guess is what many would identify as death. And they would lose their self-awareness because they would go from self-aware walking around divine trees to just your standard variation. And it's a possibility that if a Shinju undergoes this transformation, not only do they technically die, but also the person that they bit in order to gain this consciousness would also die, and thus Shinju. And therefore, even though the official translation has skewed away from using the word Shinju, I believe the fact that the Japanese word directly translating to Shinju gives us possible hints about the Shinju's role in the story and how it will play out. But enough about all that. Who are they? Well, if we're to abide by all the things that we currently understand about the Shinju, that would imply that both of these Shinju, whose identities we don't currently know, were at one time people. And therefore, in order to extrapolate who these two Shinju are, we have to ask the question, who were they? And while there's a couple of okay possible answers, they're not all fantastic. And unfortunately, a couple of the answers that make sense aren't all that exciting. But a couple of the tougher answers are a lot more exciting. So I don't really have a way that I want to work my way through this video outside of the fact that I want the answers that I believe to be true to be the last answers. So I'm just going to give you the possible theories as I stumbled upon them. See, when it comes down to it, we have substantially better answers for the identity of the girl Shinju than we do of the Mohawk Shinju. And that is to say that we have 3 possibilities of who the girl Shinju could be, and really only 2 for the Mohawk. So I first want to focus on the Mohawk Shinju. 1, because he's the main big bad of the group, and also because his identity is a bit more up in the air. See, when I was first reading the leaks of chapter 4, and I saw this Mohawk Shinju descending down from the heavens to talk to Boruto, I had realized by that point that these walking divine trees were just split off personalities of people who had been consumed by claw grimes, which was a bit perplexing to me because outside of Bug and Sasuke, the only person who we had really seen being bitten by a claw grime and grown into a divine tree was Soegi. You guys remember Soegi, right? Super important character in both Naruto and Boruto. And for those of you who for some reason don't remember the incredibly important character Soegi, he's a character with the tufted hair who pushes Sarada out of the way when a claw grime is coming in to bite her in, I believe, chapter 2. Therefore, Soegi is the savior of Sarada, but he's also acting as an exposition machine, as Soegi being bitten by a claw grime and turning into a tree is how we as an audience were told that people who are bit by a tree are still alive, and how Sarada as a character is being introduced to the threat of the claw grimes and the fact that people bitten by claw grimes are still alive, which is obviously going to play down the line into the fact that her father was bitten by a claw grime and therefore is still alive, but is a tree. And it's important for her character development and our knowledge as an audience to know that. And thus, really, when it came down to it, Soegi seemed like exactly that. An exposition vehicle, a named background character we can introduce and throw away sheerly to explain how the claw grime threat works. However, now that we truly understand how claw grimes work, that is to say that not only do they bite you and turn you into a failed divine tree, but also they take your personality and create a Shinju that walks around as a walking version of the failed divine tree that you turned into, it seems all but inevitable that Soegi would have a Shinju. Because while you can sit here and say,
yes, well, of course Sasuke would have a Shinju, he's insanely powerful, and maybe only the most powerful ninjas when bitten by claw grimes have enough power to create a Shinju.
And I would love for that to be the case from both a narrative perspective and for Boruto, but I'd like to remind the audience the only other Shinju whose identity we 100% know is Bug. Yes, a man by the name of Bug, a man whose main goal in life prior to becoming a Shinju was to not get killed by Code or Daemon. Bug is at best Aruka level. So if Bug holds enough strength in his tiny little bug body to create a Shinju, and a powerful one at that, I mean, let's not forget the Bug Shinju pressured Boruto in a 1v1, then there's no reason for us to believe that a full-blown Jonin of Konoha wouldn't have enough power to also create a Shinju. And thus, when it came down to it, as this clear leader of the Shinju was descending down from the heavens, my mind went to Soegi, as outside of Bug and Sasuke, he was the only named character to get bitten. There was a couple of other background ninjas bitten in chapter 2 that also turned into trees, but I don't know why we would make an unnamed background character the leader of the Shinju. But then again, for that matter, I didn't understand why we would make Soegi the leader of the Shinju. However, unfortunately, the more you look at it, the more it kind of makes sense. Not from like a narrative perspective, it makes no sense narratively whatsoever. The Shinju retain the appearance of the person who was bitten by the claw grime. This is why Sasuke Shinju looks like Sasuke. This is why Bug Shinju looks like Bug. However, it appears as though that these Shinju retain their appearance most notably through their hair, as their hair essentially become claw mark versions of the hair they had when they were alive. And Mohawk Shinju has just that, kind of a mohawk. It's also like kind of a something else. It's a haircut I have never seen before, and I don't think I ever want to see. But the most important thing about Mohawk Shinju is that there's hair on the top and no hair on the sides. He's got like reverse male pattern baldness. And that is, unfortunately, pretty much the exact hairstyle that Soegi has, as Soegi also has a ridiculous haircut, that being shaved on the sides pretty much all the way to here, and then like a torchic tuft of hair on top of his head. And thus, if you were to make a claw mark version of his hair, it would end up looking probably a lot like the Mohawk Shinju's hair. So not only is Soegi the only other named person we've seen turned into a divine tree, but also has the same hair as the Mohawk Shinju. And therefore, Soegi turning into a divine tree could actually have a lot more meaning than just him acting as an exposition vehicle. So now the somewhat weird focus we had on this background character as he saved Sarada from a claw grime in the early chapters could actually make sense, as not only is his death supposed to show us what happens when a claw grime bites a human, but also his introduction is to introduce us to somebody who will be the main antagonist of this upcoming arc. And there is some narrative juice behind that possibility, as if Sarada is heavily involved in the battle against these Shinju, which I assume she will be, because one of them is her father, and her not being involved in that battle would be criminal. Outside of the anger and confusion that she would have as she battled against her father, there would also be a lot of anger and confusion while battling against the Shinju version of the person who saved her life. And thus, through both the medium of Soegi and Sasuke, there's a lot of possible character development for Sarada. But that does still leave us with the incredibly non-satisfying answer that the biggest bad of this upcoming arc is a dude named Soegi. Not only does that not necessarily inspire fear, but also it just doesn't really have that much in terms of oomph, you know? Like, I don't care if the final antagonist is just a dude named Soegi, Shinju version or not. And thus, a much better second theory was formulated, not by me, but by my community. Because I'm gonna be real, the identity of these two characters stumped me. And thus, I took a screenshot of the manga panel when these four characters are laid out, and I asked my community, who are the two in the middle? I got a lot of really good answers, but my favorite answer thus far is towards the identity of the Mohawk Shinju. See, instead of the possibility of the Mohawk Shinju being Soegi, my community said that it's Jigen. And I have some fantastic news for you, and after rereading chapter 4, this theory makes about as much sense as Soegi. See, your initial gut reaction to the Mohawk Shinju being Jigen will be, but Jigen's dead. And you're right, Jigen is not only dead, but completely and totally burnt away. Jigen's body is ashes. It was completely destroyed as Jigen was sacrificed to create Ishiki. And thus there is no technical possibility that a claw grime would have been able to bite Jigen to create a Shinju. And thus technically the theory is dead in the water, except when you take a couple of other key moments that we saw in chapter 4 into consideration. And ironically, the most key moment we have to take into consideration here is when this Mohawk Shinju is descending down from the sky. See, a key thing to remember here is that all of these Shinju are just a part of the 10 tails that Ishiki and Kaguya brought to the Earth 2,000 years ago. Or one of the 10 tails they brought to the Earth. It's kind of confusing. A lot of things have been retconned. The most important thing to know is that they're all a part of the juvenile 10 tails that was at the Kara hideout. And therefore, as this Mohawk Shinju descends down from the heavens, it says chakra. All life on a planet, both current as well as past and long dead. We divine trees exist to suck out the chakra of all living things and form a chakra fruit. At least That was our original driving instinct. Now, there's only two reasons we would get this information dump. The first possible reason is to explain why so many Otsutsuki are interested in Earth, more specifically, turning Earth into a chakra fruit, as not only has there been thousands of legendary ninjas who existed on Earth, and now that all of these legendary ninjas have died on Earth, their chakra has seeped back into the Earth and can be consumed through the medium of a chakra fruit, but also because Shibai abandoned his body on Earth. And therefore, anybody who eats the chakra fruit of Earth gets Shibai's chakra. Or the second possibility as to why the Mohawk Shinju would release this information is to reveal to us that the chakra of any person who has ever been alive on Earth can be turned into that of a Shinju. I mean, think about it. This Mohawk Shinju is revealing to us that their primary directive is to absorb chakra, and that they can absorb chakra from both the living and the dead. And these Shinju are created through the mediums of claw grimes absorbing the chakra of the people they bite. That is to say that part of the juvenile Ten Tails is able to find an external source of chakra and create a consciousness from that, which is why we have Bug and Sasuke Shinjus. But what if instead of this head of the Shinju going the traditional route and biting somebody to create a Shinju that would lead the other Shinju into a war against Boruto and Kawaki and Konoha and maybe the rest of the world? What if instead this head of the Shinju didn't go the traditional route? But if instead this head of the Shinju is simply the remnants of the juvenile Ten Tails given form through the chakra of Jigen. See, for the life of me, I couldn't answer the question, why would the Shinju need the Ten Tails? Is it to make more claw grimes? Is it to feed Kawaki or Boruto to create a divine tree so they don't have to lose their consciousness? Or was it to make a leader? And see, the last that we saw the Ten Tails, it was an emaciated version of itself nailed to the floor with black chakra rods. However, at the beginning of chapter 4, presumably Bug Shinju was able to free it from its restraints. And therefore, in actuality, the reason that the Shinju wanted the Ten Tails free wasn't to make a divine tree or to make more claw grimes, but instead to create a leader. And therefore, this emaciated version of the Ten Tails, upon being given consciousness, turned into the leader of the Shinju. But the logical question to ask here is how? And more importantly, why Jigen? Well, let's go over a couple of things that we know about Jigen. 1, super dead. 2, lived for thousands of years as an incomplete vessel to Ishiki, and 3, would constantly siphon chakra from the juvenile Ten Tails to make sure that he could live for thousands of years as an incomplete vessel to Ishiki. See, one of the most important questions revolving around Jigen in his short stint in Boruto was, how has he been alive since the days of Kaguya? I mean, we understand that the warring period between the Senju and the Uchiha lasted 2,000 years. Thus, Jigen as a vessel had lived for at least 2,000 years. And one could possibly say that Ishiki, as an immortal living in his brain, simply also made him immortal. Ishiki, on multiple bases, said that Jigen could not contain his power and was, for all intents and purposes, a bad vessel. And therefore, multiple times throughout Jigen's short stint in Boruto, we see him absorbing chakra from the juvenile Ten Tails. Now, we're never really entirely sure as to why he does this. It could be for an amp, or it could be to stabilize the unstable vessel he's currently in. But all that really matters is that it happens. And thus, this juvenile Ten Tails would be very well acquainted with Jigen's chakra. In fact, there's a fairly good chance that this juvenile Ten Tails had some of Jigen's chakra, and therefore this juvenile Ten Tails, when trying to find a form that allowed it to operate at close to 100% power, decided to use the chakra that it had stored up from a past life, Jigen. And therefore this juvenile Ten Tails took the form of Jigen as a Shinju. And this makes sense when we consider the fact that the juvenile Ten Tails split-offs only need chakra from an external source to become Shinju, after whatever Code did to all his claw grimes, and presumably also the juvenile Ten Tails. As the reason that the claw grimes are able to bite people and turn into Shinju is because of something that Code did. And thus the real reason that this Mohawk Shinju decided to give us this exposition is to give us a hint as to how he was created. On top of that, it helps that this Mohawk Shinju looks very similar to that of Jigen. I mean, it has both a 1,000-yard mean stare and bald sides and hair on the top. Narratively, it makes a lot more sense for Jigen to be the leader of the Shinju than Soegi. However, for Jigen to be the Mohawk Shinju requires for a bit more things to happen that we haven't yet confirmed can actually happen yet. And Soegi's possibility is all but confirmed to have already happened. As whether or not Soegi is the Mohawk Shinju, Soegi will have a Shinju. So while one possibility, the Jigen possibility, is infinitely more interesting, we have much more evidence to substantiate the less interesting theory, which is Soegi. But enough about the Mohawk Shinju, what about the girl? The Harley Quinn Shinju, I've been calling her. Now, someone make the argument that identifying the identity of the girl / Harley Quinn Shinju is a lot easier than identifying the identity of the Mohawk Shinju. And They might be right, because when it comes to clear and obvious answers, we do have a somewhat more clear and obvious answer for the Harley Quinn Shinju. But that's only technically if you buy into the theory that most people in the Boruto fandom seem to be buying into. And the reason I say that is because I have an alternative theory that I may like more, but maybe a little less likely. See, if you ask your average Boruto fan who's read chapter 4, who is the Harley Quinn Shinju, most of them are probably going to give you the same answer. They're going to tell you it's Moegi, which is a pretty good theory. Remember earlier when I talked about how the ninjutsu these Shinju were seen using is how we're identifying who they are? Well, between that and physical appearance is pretty much how everyone is identifying the fact that the Harley Quinn Shinju is more likely than not Moegi. You see, because while we see every single Shinju outside of the Mohawk Shinju use some form of ninjutsu, as we see Bug turn his hand into a big claw, is Sasuke use Chidori, and the Harley Quinn Shinju use Earth Release. And while a Shinju using Earth Release wouldn't necessarily tell us that that's Moegi, the Earth Release that this Shinju uses against Boruto is the exact same Earth Release that Moegi uses against Amado. Specifically her Earth Release Gravel, where Moegi forms earth around somebody's body to trap them. And actually within the confines of Konoha, Moegi is one of the strongest Earth style users, as not only is she capable of using her Earth Release to restrain people like Amado, but also she has the ability to combine her Earth Release with her Water Release to create a diluted version of Wood Release. And therefore people believe, because we saw Moegi use this Earth Release against Amado, that it makes sense that the person using this Earth Release again against Boruto would be Moegi. And I really can't argue with that, especially when you consider the fact that the Harley Quinn Shinju basically has Moegi's hair, as Moegi in Boruto as an adult has a very iconic pigtail styled hair. That is to say that her hair splits out into two massive tufts, and outside of her hair splitting into two massive tufts, she also has two bangs. And when you look at the hairstyle of the Harley Quinn Shinju, she not only has two massive tufts of hair that go out in both directions, but also technically kind of has her hair wrapping around her face. And while some looked at that as like, oh, she's wearing a hood or a helmet of some sort, if you look closely, it's genuinely very clear that she has bangs that come down to the side of her face like Moegi. And the key difference between the Shinju and Moegi here is that the bangs continue under the Shinju's chin and then go down under her shirt and her neck. Kind of like she's wearing a onesie and her hair is the hood. But considering the fact that Sasuke's bangs are an extension of the clothes that he's wearing in his Shinju form, it would make sense that Moegi, who also has bangs, would also have her bangs become a part of the clothes that she's wearing. And therefore, between the Earth Release Gravel and the hair, it's pretty easy to assume that this Shinju is Moegi, which just means that sometime during Code's assault on Konoha, Moegi got off-screened. Or maybe Moegi and her team bumped into Code and some Claw Grimes somewhere out on a mission. But all that truly matters right now is that Moegi is in a tree and nobody really seems to know where or why, as it appears as though that the only trees that Konoha is aware of thus far are Soegi and the couple of other unnamed ninjas. But when you consider the fact that Team Moegi, which is the new Team 10, Inashikacho, are pretty much the only other Genin team that shows up to do any battling whatsoever outside of the new Team 7, and they were already confirmed to be battling against the Claw Grimes in Konoha during Code's assault, it's not crazy to assume that Moegi got bitten by a Claw Grime. So that's the identity of the female Shinju wrapped up, right? I mean, yeah, probably, but unfortunately I don't find Moegi to be that compelling of a character. And while I do believe that Moegi being a Shinju could lead to some possible character development for both Team 10 and Konohamaru, as Konohamaru has been all but forgotten by the plot of Boruto, even though he is now the Hokage's aide, which is actually a pretty good way for him to figure out that Moegi is in a tree because Shikamaru would know that, I tend to look big picture. And while plot development for Team 10 would both be very cool and technically very fitting, as the only time that Team 10 in Naruto Shippuden ever got any plot development was in the beginning of Naruto Shippuden, when they had to battle against Kakuzu and Hidan after Kakuzu and Hidan had killed their sensei. I'm looking further down the line than that. I'd like to make it entirely clear that I fully believe that this Shinju is Moegi, as there's already been multiple instances of Kishimoto basically copying Naruto Shippuden 1-for-1 and 2 Blue Vortex. Not like copying, but like hitting similar plot points, and therefore Team 10 finding a reason to be relevant in the beginning of part 2 because their sensei was taken away from them would make a lot of sense. But what I'm about to tell you is the initial theory that I had, and if this theory was true, it would actually play into the grander storyline of Boruto in a much bigger way than if it was Moegi. Because I believed initially that the female Shinju's real identity was Delta. Now, the reason that I believe that the female Shinju was Delta is because the female Shinju very clearly knows Code, and also very clearly seems to not like him. As when the female Shinju was introduced, she says, "Poor Code, it seems to be your inescapable fate to be a clown who ends up being used by somebody else. It's almost laughable." Which got me thinking about people who would not only know Code, but also not like him. Which brought me to two logical answers. Ada and Delta. Now, there's no possible way that Ada was turned into the female Shinju, because if Ada was turned into the female Shinju, that would mean that Daemon would have to be the Mohawk Shinju. And while technically that would reintroduce them to the plot as important characters who Konoha and everybody else has to battle against, as they currently kind of exist as like the Switzerland of the Boruto community, incredibly wealthy and powerful, but not really on anybody's side. I just don't think there's a distinct possibility that the Claw Grimes would be able to get past Daemon and therefore get to Ada. And while technically the Claw Grimes didn't have consciousness and therefore Ada's charm Shinjutsu wouldn't work on them, they just weren't gonna get past Daemon. However, Delta is a different story. See, Delta, like all the other members of Kara, is a cyborg. However, Delta is a bit different from all the other cyborgs within Kara. See, because every other cyborg in Kara started out as a human. Even Kashin Koji was created as a clone of Jiraiya, which means he started as a human. Any possible alterations to him happened technically to a human. However, that isn't the case for Delta, as we don't really know if Delta is a human. See, the reason that Delta is different from the rest of the members of Kara is because there's multiple Deltas, and the body that we see for Delta is technically just a vessel for the computer chip that locks into the back of her. Now, we know this because technically Naruto killed Delta, but it was later revealed that there's multiple Deltas, and the reason that there's multiple Deltas is because Amado is creating them in order to hopefully bring his daughter back to life one day. However, he's realized that he won't be able to accomplish this through the medium of these vessels in this computer chip, which is why he's implanted his daughter's personality into Kawaki's karma marking, and why he wants Kawaki to use his karma marking to implant that personality onto Ko. And therefore, one could technically make the argument that Delta isn't human enough to be turned into a Christmas tree or a failed divine tree, but there being multiple Deltas might actually give credence to the possibility that Delta is the female Shinju, because as we know, for a long time, Amado hung out at the Kara hideout, which Code is now very much in charge of. And since Amado is always making sure that Delta had a vessel to take over, and we've confirmed that there was multiple Deltas in said Kara hideout, there's a possibility that after Amado abandoned the Kara hideout, he didn't destroy all the Deltas. Therefore, Claw Grime was able to bite one of the Deltas and turn that Delta into a failed divine tree. And since there is kind of an underlying current flowing through Boruto that the body has memories too, exemplified by the fact that Kashin Koji is accidentally tapped into the memories of Jiraiya, there's a possibility that these Deltas not only have chakra of their own, which they almost definitely do, but also possibly have a personality that remembers Amado's daughter. Now, the only reason that I genuinely believe that this Shinju could be Delta is because of the downstream repercussions of this Shinju being Delta. Let's say hypothetically this Shinju is Delta. There's a possibility that Amado would come face to face with this Shinju, and there's a possibility that Amado would look at this Shinju rebirth as a possibility to getting his daughter back, as the Shinju have now displayed the ability to take chakra of dead people or cyborgs and turn those into walking flesh and blood bodies. And therefore, technically, if Mohawk Shinju is Jigen, there's no reason for us not to believe that if Amado is able to find the chakra of his deceased daughter and get that to a Claw Grime, that he wouldn't be able to recreate his daughter through the medium of a Shinju. And considering the fact that Amado consorted with a world-eating mad god in the form of Ishiki, all to get his daughter back, it's not crazy for us to assume that this isn't a bridge that he wouldn't cross. Therefore, instead of acting as a way to give us character development for Team 10, we actually build up towards character development for Amado and the development of a new supervillain in the form of Amado, who many have hypothesized will become one of the final villains of Boruto for a long time now. But more likely than not, it's Moegi. But what do you guys think? Who do you think are the identity behind the masks of these two Shinju? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, ladies, all I'm gonna say is, get you a man who's willing to consort with mad world-eating gods and build an army of cyborgs, all to get you back from the dead. You deserve that much.